Attention, attention, stop what you're doing. Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Oh my God! They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Now let's get back with Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I realize I've been on a rant about that part of it, that most of the show today. But we will get to other stuff, and I do believe Philip Ittner will be joining us for the next hour, hopefully from Ukraine, to give us kind of an update on the stuff there. The U.S. government is sending HIMARS, these long-range missiles, to Ukraine. And there was this back and forth in the news, you'll recall, about a week ago. And I'm going to try and not throw my shoulder out, patting myself on the back for being right again. But I was saying that there was a back and forth in the news about whether or not the U.S. will send them. They're probably not going to, that there's a lot of dithering by the Biden administration, dithery, and that they're not, that they're necessary and we're leaving them hanging out to dry. And I said, what's really happening is they're having a conversation with the Ukrainians saying, you can have these, just don't launch them into Russian territory, because we don't want them to use it as a predicate to ultimately attack Poland, really, and to attack, Finland as they're signing up for NATO, and to just decide we're at war with NATO because U.S. missiles flew in, and here's a picture of this missile, and it's got American writing on it, and it hit this house, and yada, yada, even though we moved the house 6 blocks over and put it under poured it into the crater. That won't matter ultimately in that decision-making process. And so I said the U.S. government is basically going to give those things to the Ukrainians. All they're going to do is get in writing some sort of guarantee that you're not going to use them that they're not going to use them in actually Russian territory. That's it. And that's exactly what happened. This week, that agreement was reached specifically, and they found that they started the delivery almost immediately. They will arrive in the next week or so, and the Severodonetsk area that everybody was clamoring about, the Jimmy Dores of the world were saying this is proof the Ukrainians are losing because the Russians took some territory in the east of Ukraine, which they had previously claimed earlier, but also they, in this area of Severodonetsk, when it turns out that if you look at the terrain there, the Ukrainians made a choice to back away from Severodonetsk up into the hills, allow the Russians to go in, and then bomb the crap out of them from the hillside, basically using the advantage of high ground as you do in battle. And it worked. In a matter of 24 hours, that seized city is now 50% back in Ukrainian hands, not because they bombed that entire city, to drive them out, but because they strategically hit them as they were coming across these fields, and they had to draw back, and they don't have enough forces to take the entirety of the city. And that in and of itself is increasingly what's going to happen once the HIMARS are in there, because that allows them to move the howitzers closer, and then they're going to start brooming the Russians towards the border. Meanwhile, the Russians themselves are clamoring for nuclear war with the rest of the world, saying that a war with NATO was always part of the plan. That's fun. That's a fun part of the conversation, that they were always planning on a war with NATO. And that one of the guys on their Vladimir Zelenov show, 60 Minutes, that they have, which is ironically, it's an hour-long show about, but it's a live thing. It's like the Russian version of The Five on Fox. That during the conversation, their guy was saying, we're just testing our military and our weapons in Ukraine to use on NATO. We want to see what NATO has, the kind of stuff they bring into the battlefield, and then we'll know what they have, and we'll know how our stuff works, and then we're going to attack all the NATO countries next. And that was always the plan. These are people on Russian television in prime time on the primary news network. This is not, the namby-pamby fooling around, slow walking munition stuff that even Rand Paul is doing. This is not the MTG on Fox News making the argument that our money should be better spent at home, and we're defending this border thousands of miles away when our border is unsecure. That silly political conversation. That that belief that the United States can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Which, I mean, granted, when Trump was president, we were having trouble drinking water and walking a ramp at the same time, I think is where that went. But ultimately, this is an order of magnitude greater and indicative of what was always part of the plan. The belief system in Russia is becoming more stark, more obvious, and clearer with every passing day. And their belief system is that this is a war of cultures, that there is an intrinsic, however bizarre, difference between being Russian and being European. To that end, it's a very. I can't imagine the United States starting a war with Mexico or Canada on the pretense that we're not North Americans. You know what I mean? Like that's the quality of that argument.
Right.
And to threaten nuclear war because of an assumed label based on geographical connection, which has nothing to do with the underlying belief systems of or the religious belief systems, the philosophy, the history of any of these countries. France is a European country. Germany is a European country. They're under the European Union, but culturally they're strikingly different. And as a tourist, as anybody who has lineage from those countries, you see them as incredibly different, strikingly so, especially if you look around World War I and World War II era. But at the same time, none of them are fighting a war with each other because they don't want to be called Europeans. It's like an Asian war because China and Vietnam don't want to be seen as Asian countries, or the Middle East saying we're not the Middle East, we're the southwestern corner of the Middle East, and therefore we need to, I guess, engage in world-ending wars with people over labels. The irony that one of the predicates that Vladimir Putin was using is that the West is full of gender-confused oyster eaters. That was his thing. I'm like, I don't know where the oyster thing came from. Like, if you're a sexual hedonist, I suppose you're gonna need to stack somehow. But I mean, maybe it's because Viagra is too close to home for him or something, or it's a Black Sea thing. Maybe there's oysters that come out of the Black Sea I'm not aware of, and that's a thing. But the idea that the West doesn't even know what gender we are. We're confused about that, and therefore, meanwhile, these people are, yes, he said oyster eaters, medium T. That's a direct quote.
Yeah.
He's saying that the West is having cultural fights over what it means to be a man or woman, or a male or female, or binary or non-binary, or all those kind of things. And say what you will about that, and it certainly gets contentious at times. And there's a definite cultural back and forth that's happening everywhere around here. But at no point has either side threatened to nuke the other side out of existence with any seriousness. It is a level of absurdity that continues to stack every day. And Philip Ittner is going to be joining us in this and I want to talk about a little bit of the ratcheting up of talk, because I have some theories. I have some theories that the United States, for example, we have a ridiculous amount of nuclear weapons. We have the quality of our nuclear weapons, like how fast they go, the damage they can do, is absurd. It's off the charts. It is the greatest nuclear arsenal on the planet. Everybody else is like way far behind, and we don't talk about it. You know why we don't talk about it? Because we know it works, and we don't want to use it. And we don't need to threaten using it because we have conventional warfare capabilities that are also off the charts, where we can carry this out without any of that, without needing that part of it. I just don't think you start clamoring about nuking the world if you're winning and if you're convinced of your own superiority. It sounds to me like the kind of like barking a chihuahua does when it's in a corner. You ever meet somebody who has one of those little pocket dogs, and then you go to pet it, and it just loses its mind, and its eyes roll back. It's like, and you're like, all right, that's adorable. I recognize you can bite me, and if you have a disease, I'm probably going to get it from that bite. But in general, if I really needed to, but relax, dog. But those are the ones that freak out the most, right? Those are the ones. Big dogs just kind of let them bounce around. It just seems like it's leaning that way. We got to take a break. We'll come back. Philip Ittner is going to be joining us from Ukraine. And we'll talk a little bit about Severodonetsk, and we'll talk a little bit about where the Russians think this is going. I don't think it's going the way they expect, even now. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at halsparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn puss-faced little pimp stick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Welcome back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT. Right now, I'm live on infotainmentwars.com and, of course, at twitch.tv/Hal Sparks with our dear friend Philip Ittner, who is in Kiev. You're in Kiev right now. Yes?
I am.
Yeah. In Ukraine, and Johnny Million, of course, live in Chicago as well. We're just spread out all over the world. It's the wonders of technology. I got to say, it's incredible.
It's amazing.
It's crazy. Now, Philip, as we were leading up to the top of this, and I'm sure we're going to gather some questions in the chat room. If you're on Twitch, or you're on YouTube or Facebook, watching the show, just put in the chat, put in the chat so Johnny can see it. Like, attach his name or
baby.
Yeah, three question marks before your question. Maybe that's the way we can spot them, make it easier for Johnny so he can gather them up.
Those questions.
Yeah. So I've been watching. This. There's like 3 or 4 strategists online that are keeping track of the geolocatable pictures where they know. Where the Russians are, what advances they've made, where the Ukrainians have pushed back, where the beat. Like, there's one guy who tracks the volume of Russian BTGs, battalion tactical groups in their territory, and they seem to be moving chunks of these groups around in. And I must say, I'll choose my words very carefully. Incredibly stupid ways. The Russians lost another general this week, who was piloting an aircraft. He had just done a bombing run on a civilian area, and as he was pulling out, he was shot out of the sky, and there was no time to eject. They know that he perished in the flight. And this guy, fascinating story, had been demoted, I think in 2012, for taking control of a plane he was not checked out on. He was in a plane with he and his buddy in the Russian military took one of the planes and just decided to go for a fly. He wasn't checked out on it. He took the controls of the thing, and they went into a tailspin. They had to eject, and it was this, multi-million dollar aircraft. The guy was, and they were both drunk, of course. This is well-known story about this guy. He died this week because he, even as a general, was flying actual attack formations, and he was leading a group of a BTG group that were continually trying to cross on these pontoon bridges. We know the famous one where they destroyed the pontoon bridge and all these vehicles and hundreds of men around it. That's happened 3 times since then, trying to cross the same river with different groups of people. And they keep stacking these people in the same place as targets, as if the Ukrainian drones don't exist. It's amazing to me.
Well, that's their military doctrine, and it always has been. And I don't want to be too flippant about it. I don't
Right.
want to. I don't want to say that they have absolutely no regard for their military forces, but they have a lot of people. That's kind of one of their assets that they have in the Russian military. And they do. I mean, look, you just look at their history, their military history. Their doctrine is such that they just throw bodies at it.
Right. They used to have a lot of people. They don't anymore. Now that in 2 weeks' time, the Russians went from allowing 30-year-olds to join to 35, 40, 45-year-old, now 50 years old. You can still you can join the Russian military in 2 weeks. That is not something that you do because 6 months of battle have gone awry and you're being driven back by the overwhelming force. In 2 weeks' time, that means they tried to bring up every 35-year-old they could find and nobody was coming. So they tried 40s and nobody was coming for days and days. And they've got months, if not years, they're going to have to train these guys to get them up and ready for battle.
Yeah, I mean, I've told you the story before, I think. I mean, they've been notifying people that are in their 50s and who may have gone to basically an ROTC training thing for like a few weeks 30 years ago when they were in their 20s. And those people are being notified that they might be called up. You don't do that unless you're desperate.
Right. And again, the Ukrainians were doing it at the beginning, like leading up to this war. And in the first couple of weeks, there were all these, they were showing the Azov battalion, the much maligned Azov battalion, teaching civilians how to fight, like with wooden cutout AK-47s and M16s, literally that they, that whatever gun they would cut them out of wood and teach them tactically how to move, how to point the gun, and move in tactical groups so they wouldn't hurt each other. All that kind of stuff. That was happening. That's understandable when your country is under attack by a giant, overwhelming force from a country that is 8 times the size of yours, as far as its military and the like. It doesn't make any sense when you're the Russians. It's stunning to me that this is still going on.
Well, and look, they're having to turn people away. That's how intense it is here in Ukraine.
Right.
They're having to turn people away. And I know people in Ukraine, Ukrainian men of a certain age, who are upset because they're not able to go and shoot Russians.
Right.
They want to kill as many Russians as they possibly can. That's the attitude here. So look, there's a lot that's been going on in the last week, and there's been some talk of like some dissension in the ranks and stuff like that. There's a little bit of that going on, certainly, but overwhelmingly, this country remains unified.
Yeah.
And if anything, the vast majority of people in this country would pick up a weapon at a moment's notice and head towards wherever the Russians are.
Well, I guess that's my first question for you, and we'll get into we're heading towards a break, and then we'll talk about it in the next one as well. That the parts of the country, the western part of the country, seems to be kind of operating almost at full steam again at this point, considering how brutal the fighting is in the east, comparatively. That said, arguably they're kind of used to it. They've been dealing with the Donbass fighting for a long time. The difference is they now have got the backing of the rest of the world, and the idea that we now have an ambassador, I believe, in Kiev, if I'm not mistaken. So there's the Russians are now in a position that they haven't been in for a while, that if they fire a missile into Kiev and they hit the U.S. ambassador, that's an order of magnitude. Are they ready for that progression? And I'm sure you've seen some of the Russian 60 Minutes stuff about how they are talking about this. Now, let's take a break right now. When we come back, I just want
let's take a break. We'll talk about it on the other side.
Yeah, on the other side of this, we'll discuss, of course, in every war, there's going to be back and forth because people will feel they've got a better idea of how to win it, or some people might be sympathetic to a peace process. That's always going to happen, always has, in every fight, in every country, forever and ever. The difference will be, when that starts happening in Russia. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the show. We, of course, have a multitude of conversations about stuff during the breaks as well at infotainmentwars.com, or, of course, at twitch.tv/HalSparks. Support the show by subscribing today, like and thumbs up, notification bell, all that stuff I'm supposed to say as a pro streamer. Now, I just want to get your kind of update, Philip, as well, on how the Ukrainians are feeling about the Russian response to all this, because I've been watching that the Russian media monitor stuff, and holy crap, they don't sound like a winning team. They sound like they're in a bad huddle.
Yeah, and the one thing that, of course, they don't need to go through Media Matters because they have the common language. So, every time you hear kind of the more bellicose things coming out of Russia, it only serves as an added incentive for the Ukrainians, because the more crazy stuff that comes out of Russia about, like, we have to actually destroy the concept of there being a Ukraine.
Yeah,
they're just like, well, okay, but you're not giving us a lot of choice here.
Yeah,
so. It just reinforces the Ukrainians' will to fight, because they recognize, and look, they don't have to wait to hear it from Russia on First Channel in Moscow. They know perfectly well. They know the Russians as well as anybody on the planet.
Right.
They've lived under their thumb for centuries. They know they know their ways.
Yeah.
And, they know that if they lose this fight, that's why, look, I keep coming back to this so many times. And I did a roundtable last night with some people who were like doom and gloom. They're taking Donbass. Are you still optimistic, Phil? And I'm like, you don't understand. Whatever happens in the Donbass, and whatever happens with whatever lines are drawn, whatever negotiation happens, they win by surviving. They win by there is a country called Ukraine, and that is not something that has been around a lot, and they have been fighting for that for centuries, literally centuries.
Yeah.
And so for them, just when the dust settles, if there is a country that is not subjugated by a neighboring country, and it is called Ukraine, it will be a major victory for them.
Correct.
And I don't see how that doesn't happen. I can't see a scenario where there isn't a Ukraine after that. And then we have to see what happens, because then already also, by the way, we're going to start to see a partisan guerrilla war in the territory that was taken. I don't have a crystal ball and I can't see into the future, but I would bet you anything, knowing the nature of these people. And it's a little different out in the East. They are closer to Russia, but even still, given the way the Russians have acted, I do think that even in the occupied territories, that are, as they stand now, they may have taken it, but holding it is a very different thing.
Right. Well, that's in any battle, and I mean, look at the history of World War II, look at the history of World War I, look at Vietnam. Any of these, there's always this back and forth. The question ultimately becomes who is building a sort of an entrenchment that holds on. Well, the occupied territory always has a leg up in this area because they own the streets and the territory already. You have to take it from them, then you have to hold on to it. The Russians have, if you look at this in the context of this being one long battle, one long war, since they took the East and since they took Crimea, you could argue that this has been going on this entire time. And this is exactly the same problem the Russians have had. They have been trying to hold Donbass and Crimea since 2014. This has all been about that. This has just escalated because they decided to go for it because they were, tired of fighting on a smaller scale, and ultimately they want the whole thing.
Yeah, and let's not sugarcoat this as well. I mean, there are people out in the Donbass who are not very pleased with a lot of what Ukraine has done over the last 8 years because it's been an active war zone, and so there's been an exchange of fire. So civilians get caught up in that. So there is some animosity towards Kiev, but the territories that are now being taken are places where infrastructure has been built, most notably in Kherson and Mykolaiv. Those are not pro-Russian spots, not nearly what you might see in Lugansk or Donbass. And I would argue that's even artificially been created by Russia as well, to the extent that it is. So they're gonna have more problems than they are aware of when they continue to occupy territory, because there is we've talked about this in the past, but I'll say it again. There's a fundamental difference between Ukraine and Russia in that Russia is hearkening back to a former glory. Ukraine is looking for a bright future once they break free of centuries of oppression and colonial rule. And so that is a positive message. And also, they live differently. When the Russian soldiers rock up into some small town in Ukraine, they are shocked to see flat screen TVs. They're stealing microwaves, for goodness sakes.
Right.
Because the Ukrainians live like Europeans.
Right. And there's been some apparently chafing going on between the Russians that have been transplanted into that part of Ukraine on behalf of the Russian government, kind of like moving people in, just the same way the Chinese are doing in Xinjiang with the Han Chinese people, where they were literally, the Chinese government has been putting a Han male in the homes of married Uyghur couples, with the idea being is that if they take the man away to a camp and he never comes back, the woman will essentially have a half Han kid. Like, it's gnarly. It's really, it's quite dramatic.
And here the ethnic cleansing includes, and we just had it on International Children's Day, and I put out a vlog yesterday about it, is the announcement that the sheer level of people that they have been taking from the occupied territories and sending into Russia. I mean, tens of thousands. If we can take President Zelensky's word at it, 200,000 children have been taken from their homes. 200,000 children have been taken from their homes in Ukraine and resettled in Russia, and that includes forced adoptions. I mean, it's just the brutality of what the Russians are doing here is on a completely different level, and nothing we've seen before on the European continent. Since World War II. I would even say the Balkans wars weren't this bad.
Right, agreed. But it's also a strategy that was very heavily around during Tsarist Russia and predating that. The idea of taking the children of another tribe and enslaving them, or using them to pad your own numbers in a certain area, especially if they're of the same basic genetic cut, which happened all through the Slavic areas.
Russia's demographics are not good.
Right. And he even admitted it. Yeah. That was the other thing. Putin admitted the other day that they have a true demographic problem, which I was shocked to have him actually say out loud, or at least in a pre-taped thing. That's the other thing too. So the Christopher Steele, famously known for the Steele dossier, right?
Yeah.
The story of the PP tape and the like, has said that according to his insiders, and he was, as former MI6, and he has these connections with these Russians over there, that Putin is incredibly ill, that he's got, blood cancer or stomach cancer, that he's on he's in really bad shape. He needs apparently medical help every half hour. So he has these meetings, which when they edit them together look like these long drawn out meetings. But in reality, every time they cut away, they're taking him out of the room and his team is helping him. Does that, I've never seen him as a true believer, and some people find, their God, no matter how nefarious, on their deathbed, but is that conversation happening around Ukraine about, is this his last dying effort to be, of ego to try and get a statue of himself by reclaiming Ukraine. And if he goes sometime soon, somebody sensible might step in and go, well, never mind.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with Ukrainians here, and it's a mixture of good, I hope he dies soon,
right,
and oh my goodness, that means he's got very little to lose,
right,
and that scares us.
Yes.
So I've had that I've had both of those conversations with Ukrainians, not only here in Kiev, but of course back in Lviv. In Lviv, they're a little bit more like, hope he dies. Because they're less likely to get it in the neck if he really does try and do something. I mean, Kiev is high on the list of targets for the Russians to really try and demolish, because they one of their strategic goals has always been to destroy the government here. Yeah. So people here are a little bit more like, I don't know, that puts us in a bad situation, but.
Yeah,
they're also not. Look, this is also not a surprise to them. We are watching. We in the West, and I don't mean I mean you have been wonderful, Hal and Johnny. You guys have been great, but you're over there and we're here.
Yeah.
So this is our life. We digest every possible thing that we can get our hands on, and so the fact that Putin is sick is not a surprise to anybody in Ukraine.
Right.
They're like, you know, in other words, ice is cold and water's wet.
Yeah.
It's been an open secret for a very, very long time in the former Soviet Union, and particularly within Ukraine.
Right.
So, because this is their life, and also because there's connections and there's family connections between Ukrainians and Russians, and they don't have to go through the filter of a language translation, or they know that something is up. Something is very, very bad in the Kremlin. Something is not working right. And I've got Russian friends as well who've been telling me for months, a better part of a year, that there was something wrong with Putin, and that there was a health issue, but also that there was something bad happened to him during COVID. A lot of talk that COVID really, really changed him, and maybe those two things are not mutually exclusive. Maybe he has been diagnosed for quite some time and was aware that was
well, one of the concerns was that he's got immunocompromised because of the cancer treatment he's on and cannot get vaccinated, and therefore is afraid that if he gets the infection, especially as bad as Delta was, and if you look at the arc of his panic and the timing of stuff, the Delta wave after the wild type, both of those were the biggest spikes in deaths. And just like the Chinese vaccine, the Russian one doesn't work. It's not great. It's not, the
Sputnik. Here's an interesting note about the Sputnik.
It's stolen from AstraZeneca.
There you go. Stolen from Oxford.
Yeah.
Stolen from a British lab.
Right.
Was hacked and stolen and was not complete.
Yeah.
So they rushed to get it out based on incomplete data that they stole from the Brits.
And AstraZeneca's one is the one that is having the most sort of blowback as far as secondary health problems. That's why it didn't get cleared in the United States. There's been some secondary neurological issues that people have been talking about, and all of it could point to that he got that inoculation, and it's causing him, depression, paranoia, nervous tingles, like back spasms, all the stuff that you hear about, all makes sense in the concept of this. And also, the other story was that this Kirilo Budanov, who speaking to the Ukrainian Times, said that not long after they started their invasion, he survived an assassination attempt. And the question was it inside or outside? We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm sure we've got questions in the chat, and I want to get to those.
We got questions.
In the second half of this hour. Philip Ittner is joining us live from Kiev, and Johnny Million's farming questions for you guys. I got plenty. And I'm trying not to talk too much. We'll be back right after this.